chapter 9. Everyone turn to Esther, chapter 9. There are 32 verses in the 9th chapter of Esther, so we're going to jump straight in because it's a long one. It's actually one of the longer chapters of Esther. A lot of them have been about 12 to 16 verses each, so this is almost like double the length, which is incredible. But we're going to go straight in. Okay, verses 1 to 10. The Jews defeat their enemies. Adam, can you read that for us, please? Verses 1 through to 10. That'd be fantastic.
On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but no, the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the province of King Xerxes to attack those seeking to their destruction. No one could stand against them, because the people of all other nations were afraid of them. And all the nobles and the provinces, the straps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was promoted in the palace. His reputation spread through the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susay, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parshadath, Dalphon, Aspath, Peratha, Adelina, Eredith, Paramashta, Arisa, Arida, and Vezatha. What? Vezatha?
Vajizatha?
Vajizatha?
Yeah. And then verse 10.
Okay. The 10 sons of Haman, sons of Hamadatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder.
Awesome. I gave you all the crazy names. I'm sorry about that.
Zabadatha.
Yeah. Hamadatha. Yeah, that's a good one. So, verse 1, it tells you when this is all going down. We get a real kind of clear idea. What's up, man?
When the Jews raided people, why did they take the plunder?
I will tell you that when we get there, I promise. Okay. If I don't answer your question well enough, then you can put your hand back up and say, do better. Do better, Pastor Jamie. I'll say, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so verse 1, in the 12th month on the 13th day. 12th month, 13th day. So, it's kind of crazy because that was the day which Haman's advisor had led him to select as the extermination date of the Jews. What's going on?
We just noticed that the tiling is
it's a chessboard, like Esther the Queen. You know,
yeah,
that's the whole point. That's good. I'm glad you noticed now when we're at verse chapter 9 out of 10.
It only took a little more than 2 months.
I know. So we can read in Esther 3, verses 7. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Xerxes, they cast pure, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month Adar. So basically, that was when Haman's plan was going to go down. 13th day, 12th month, that's when they cast the lots, they rolled the dice, they found those dates, they said this is when it's all going to happen, the execution of the Jews. And we read about it, we studied it. This is already stuff that we already know. Verse 2, the Jews gathered themselves together throughout all the cities and all the provinces of the king, and the officers of the king helped the Jews. This wasn't the case. Remember, we can just fast forward a couple of chapters, rewind a couple of chapters to the Jews being persecuted, being ready to be killed, massacred, completely wiped out because of Haman's decree. And now they're joined with people who represent the king, people who represent the guards, people who represent authority in the land now. And it's kind of crazy because it says in verse 1, the Jews basically were allowed to stand up against their enemies and do whatever they wanted to them. The Jews had rule over them that hated them. Everyone who hated the Jews, everyone who wanted them dead, the Jews had rule over them, power over them. There's been a real flip-flop here. The tables have turned, right? So no man could withstand them. The Jews now were at complete liberty or freedom to act on the defensive. You're coming to attack me? I don't have to just stand still and take this now. I can defend myself, but also, I might kill you back. You know? Now they've got the blessing of the king. They've got the blessing of the soldiers. They've got people who work for the king, working alongside them, trying to keep them alive as well. They were everywhere victorious, it says. And it's just incredible that actually everything's kind of coming into play here. The Jews haven't just been saved, but they've been given complete victory in this area. The Jews had their enemies, those who wished to destroy them, but with the king on their side, with all his resources, with the king in their corner, it didn't matter who was against them. There's been a complete flip-flop. The second in command, Haman, wanted to kill them, wanted to destroy them, wanted to exterminate them because of his jealousy and his aggression towards Mordecai. But then suddenly, Haman's out of the picture. The king's now on the side of the Jews. Now the Jews are rising up and saying, hey, we're unstoppable. God's really taking care of them. But remember, God hasn't been mentioned in Esther still. We're in 9 chapters in, and God hasn't been mentioned still. It's incredible. So the Jews were no longer going to be the victims who were mourning and weeping in the streets, as Wes said last week. He taught, and he said basically their sadness turned to joy. Their mourning turned to feasts. Their sadness turned into celebration. You know, they're weeping, they're crying out, turned to joy. Right? And that's an amazing thing. When you think suddenly all has been lost, everything's been taken away, death is at your doorstep, and suddenly you can celebrate and have fun instead and have feasts and banquets. That's a complete different change of the tide right there. No man could withstand them. Their numbers were great. Their standing was great. Their backing was great. Verse 3 says, and all the rulers of the provinces and the lieutenants and the deputies and the officers of the king helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. The fear of Mordecai. Well, let's talk about Mordecai for a second. We can talk about the rise of Mordecai, because he's had quite a journey. He's not just a scary person and that's why they're scared of him. There's been a real up and down roller coaster with Mordecai. We can check it in chapter 2, verse 7. Mordecai adopted his orphaned cousin as Esther. Mordecai then discovered a plot to assassinate the king, and because of his vigilance, he was able to save the king through this. Okay, that seems like pretty good right there, right? Got a new family member, that's great. That's a good start to a story. We've adopted a new baby, this is awesome. And then I've stopped someone from being murdered, that's even better. Then Mordecai refuses to bow down when Haman was promoted to second under the king. This is when it starts going downhill. Seeing this, Haman gets angry over Mordecai's refusal to respect him, which led not just to Mordecai being killed, but this plan to destroy all the Jews. This is crazy. Mordecai, whilst at the gates of the king, mourning in sackcloth and ashes, communicates to the scene to Queen Esther, who then was able to use her favor to talk to the king and reverse this whole scheme. Right? But think about this. He's went from saving the king to not even being allowed in the king's presence. He's went from being able to adopt the queen, the future queen, Esther, into his family, to not even be able to speak to her face to face. There's been a real flip-flop that's going on here. But Mordecai's there. And then this communication led to the king to authorize the Jews to kill their enemies. The plot to be spoiled, Haman not to get his way, and then Haman destroyed, hung from the gallows, and Mordecai raised up to second in command under the king. And now we can read in verse 4, for Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man, Mordecai, waxed greater and greater. Adam's version said his fame grew bigger and bigger. Right? People just kept getting to know him more and more. This was a guy who wasn't anyone special. Wasn't allowed in the king's presence. The guy crying at the gates, that's who that was. And suddenly he's raised up to second in command. And he just gets more famous and more famous. But Mordecai's position wasn't just recognized by the king then. It tells us that it was recognized by other people, seeing that it grew more and more. People knew more about him, understood him more, saw him as authority more, understood his influence more. Verse 5 tells us that the Jews killed, destroyed all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and did what they would unto those who hated them. Did whatever they wanted. Doesn't matter. I've got the backing of the king. I've got Mordecai's decree. I've got the backing of the queen. I've got the guards standing next to me. But overall, again, not mentioned, they're being saved by God, because they were all going to be exterminated. And verses 6 to 10 tells us all the cities where the Jews fought their enemies. All of these places, and on top of that, the 10 sons of Haman were killed also. But they did not touch the plunder. This comes to your question in a second, okay? I'm going to answer it in a second. Just be listening. So Haman had planned to destroy all the Jewish people, including the women and the children, and now his sons are targeted by the Jewish people. Haman was an Agagite, which meant he was a long-time enemy of Israel. We know that because that's how he is called. He's called the son of Hammedatha, an Agagite. Okay? That's where it all comes down to. That's his family tree. And the great thing to think here is that even when the enemies have been killed, the Jews don't touch the plunder, the stuff that they could just take away because no one's going to stop them. They didn't touch their plunder. Even though in Esther 8, verse 11, the king's decree allowed it. He said, you can do it. You can kill them, wipe them out, and then take what you want. Because that's now officially yours. But they don't touch it. So this basically means, here's your answer to your question, the Jews didn't take the plunder because they weren't killing people for personal gain. They were killing people to save themselves. Because it's really easy to take possessions of a dead man, but actually they were trying to protect themselves. And that kind of tells you about someone's heart as well. If you kill someone and you rob them, maybe you just wanted what they had. This is them standing up for themselves. Does that make sense? You sure?
Yeah.
You want to tell me to do a better job?
No.
Cool. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Yeah. Then we're going to jump to our second section here, verses 11 to 17. Who wants to read that for me? You want to go for a chat? Thank you.
On that day, the number of those who were slain in Shushan, the place was brought before the king palace. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan, the palace, and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is the petition, and it shall be granted thee? Or what is thy request further, and it shall be done? Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow, also according unto this day's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged upon the gallows. And the king commanded it so to be done. And the decree was given at Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. For the Jews that were in Shushan gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month Adar, and slew 300 men at Shushan. But on the prey they laid not their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, and stood for their lives, and had rest from their enemies, and slew of their foes 75,000. And they laid not their hands on the prey. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same rested they, and it made it a day of feasting and gladness.
Thanks, Shannon. Okay, so in section 1, the Jews defeat their enemies. So you'd think that'd be enough, okay? But then when you pass over to section 2, verses 11 to 17, Esther asks for the complete defeat of the enemies of the Jews. Anyone living in this province or the king's empire, the kingdom, who hate the Jews need to be gone. Seems pretty aggressive, right? From being saved to them being like, I want them out of here, I want them all gone. But there's a reason. It's because they're enemies, they're sworn enemies, they're long time enemies. It's kind of sad, but that's just the way it has to be. So how many people have been killed, by the way? Did anyone catch that?
70.
300 plus what?
300 plus 10.
Plus 10?
Yeah, I think 10 sons.
Okay. So let's read back through this again. So we've got 10 sons straight away.
75,000.
75,000. Okay, plus the 300, and then there's another number in there as well.
75,310.
Anyone else found it?
10.
So what we've got here.
500 men.
There you go. So you've got how much is it all together, Adam? Let's go. 75,000.
80,310.
What?
Right?
75,810.
If you include, and maybe the sons were included in that, or maybe they weren't. So we can just say about 75,800 people, give or take 10. Okay, but there's a lot of destruction. How's it going?
Why are they killing the sons? What they do?
Maybe the sons were fighting against them. Maybe the sons were really angry that their dad had just been killed. Maybe the sons had a bit of a tendency to follow in their dad's footsteps.
Also, like, how old would they have been?
I don't know. Wes, do you think?
Because I can't imagine them just hanging.
I think he
I'm
mentions
just thinking that like the Jews were allowed to kill all their like little children. It says little ones. It doesn't say anything about that here. I'm trying to see if he, when he was boasting about his sons, if he said anything about them.
Let's say
having wives.
he boasted about how proud, how many people he had. But Adam, what's up?
So, were they rounding in the Bible, or were they literally like, okay, 300, stop?
Who knows? But it's written down that this many people.
That'd be weird if they're, King Xerxes are like, only even numbers, okay?
Maybe that was his thing. Wes is doing some digging around for you fans about their ages, but the whole reason about this is, if you were going to kill the father, you'd have to get rid of the sons, because the whole point was to get rid of that lifeline, that family tree, to stop that family tree from coming back, try and kill you. That was kind of a tendency back in those days. And you see that with some movies where it's like you kill the father, the son comes back to avenge the father's death, and it's all like that Hollywood. That's how it used to be, right? That's just how it used to be. And that's the thing. So they're going and killing their sons because, well, you're Haman's. You're connected to that person who tried to wipe us out. So we want you gone. And it's not a nice thing. You know, no one will tell you it's a nice thing, but it's just the way it was handled back then. You know? So we're going to go back to the king's palace. We can read that the king learns of how many people the Jewish people have defeated, have killed, and he shares this information with Esther. So there's now a willingness to involve Esther in the big details, in the big plan. Because remember, back in Esther 4:11, she says basically, the king's not called me into his presence for like 30 days. I'm on the outside. I'm not in. I can't just go in and walk to him and be like, hey, king. No, he doesn't want me there. If I walk in front of him, there's a chance that I will die. But now the king's like, hey, Esther, have you heard how many people they've killed now? And she's involved in what's going on. And on that day, a report came back to the king of all those who were slain in Shushan, that 500 men were killed, and in those the 10 sons of Haman. Esther asked for it to be granted that the sons would hang from the very gallows which Haman did, and the next day this decree would stand. So basically, the original decree was like a one-day thing. Get it done in a day. Stand up and fight back in a day. And how many did they kill in that first day? They killed 500 people.
But 10 were included in that, so...
500 people. Exactly. So basically the second decree, or this extra extension of this decree, would put it on for next day. Okay, so the king commanded it to be done. The decree went out and they hanged Haman's sons. Now Haman's sons had already been killed, but now Esther requests that their corpses, it's pretty brutal, be impaled and publicly displayed. Don't go against the Jews, basically. Don't go against God's people. How's it going?
I thought Esther was a nice person.
Esther's just saved God's people.
Yeah, we might as well call her Dracula at this point.
Dracula? Don't call her Dracula.
Vlad
Her name's...
That's what he did.
Her name's Esther. So this would have brought fear and intimidation to those around, right? You look up and you see these bodies hanging from big pokey sticks. What did they do to get up there? Oh, that's Haman and that's Haman's sons right there. They tried to go against God's people. They tried to exterminate a whole nation. They tried to do something crazy, and they ended up there. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Rough way to learn lessons, right?
So Haman is still on that post. Just
I mean, how are you going to get him down?
Chilling there.
that's awful.
Birds are going to start pecking, I know that. So Esther was using the sons as a message, along with Haman, to all those who had come against the Jews, all those who had come against God's people, to say, don't do it. This is what happens when you try and wipe us out. And on the 14th day, the Jews in the king's provinces gathered again and stood for their lives and killed 75,000 people. And then on the 14th day, another 300 were killed. I think this is a crazy part about all of this. Just because of the sheer amount of people who died. Right? And I think it's one of those, you don't think that Jews are going to be that aggressive or that violent. But nothing's saying from the other side that people weren't trying to come and still kill them, because guess what decree was still in play? You need to think about this. Haman's decree, even though Haman is dead, was signed by the king. What did we work out? Anything written by the king can't be changed. How do you get rid of the thing written by the king? You write a new decree. Okay, so they're going to try and come and fight you, and I guess you can't do anything about it. I'm sorry, the decree says it. No, false, wrong. Second decree, you can stand up and fight back. So the Jews are fighting back in defense. They're not just standing around getting wiped out now. They're actually allowed to fight back. How's it going?
So does that mean there were still Jews getting killed?
Most probably.
And probably bounties still being collected?
Yeah, and where was that money coming from?
The king.
The king. Because it had his signet ring, his stamp of approval, his authority all over it. So the way that he got around it was, defend yourselves. Fight back. Don't allow yourselves to get killed. Stand up. Right? All on the day and following days of when Haman had intended to wipe out the Jews. So basically this all happened on those days surrounding the big day for extermination for Haman's plan. This is when it's going to go down. This is the big one. This is the kickoff point. And on that day is when the Jews started fighting back. When they were allowed to stand up and defend themselves. And you think they fought on the days that were allowed by the king. This is the funniest part to me. Because there was probably a lot of fighting going on. And there's a lot of killing. And there's a lot of bloodshed. And we can read that 75,000 plus people killed. But when the king said stop, what did they do? They stopped. And they turned it into a banquet, I think it says, or made it a day of feasting and gladness in verse 17. On the 13th day of the month Adar, and on the 14th day of the same rested day, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Bloodshed in the morning, feasting in the afternoon. Why not? But they made it a celebration to say this is us being saved. To think that on one day you are waiting for your own destruction, knowing that a decree is allowing people to come and destroy you, then suddenly you're allowed to defend yourselves. And not even just defend yourselves, you're allowed to kill those who are coming to kill you. That's a big difference. The Jews have been given a death sentence and have then suddenly been given life again. That's incredible. There were some pictures I liked. This one right here, kind of the uprising, people being killed. This is, I don't know who drew these or painted these or anything like that. This guy's shouting something like, run! But the idea of people were then trying to fight back. They weren't just standing still, sitting ducks. They were trying to fight back. And this is a big deal. This is something to be said about personal freedom, personal liberty, personal responsibility for your life. And basically the king signing this decree to say, you're not just a victim anymore. You are allowed to defend yourselves. And that's a big deal. Get ready for a second. So we're going to be looking at the section 3. Let's go for Joshua. Can you read verses 18 and 19, please?
Yeah.
Which is the feast of Purim, which is established.
But the Jews that were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day thereof, and on the 14th day thereof, and on the 15th day of the same they rested, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in the unwalled towns, unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month Adar a day of gladness and feasting, a good day, and of sending portions one to another.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So, Jewish people in Susa celebrate a day later because they've been in battle for like 2 days. Basically, it's telling you what's happening. It's describing this is how long it was, this is how it went down, this is what these people are doing. They made this day a day of feasting, a day of gladness, and of sending portions one to another. So basically, culture back then, the princes and the people of the East not only invited their friends to feast, like those they knew around them, they'd invite everyone. You're going to have a celebration on the day in the kingdom, everyone's invited. You better have enough food for everyone, enough wine for everyone. Everyone's going to turn out. And if they can't turn out, they would send food and drink to their houses to say, you can still celebrate with us.
That's really nice.
Right? And that's a really cool way to do it. So they spent a day doing this, of feasting. I'm gonna get fat, I'm gonna get filled up on drink and chicken and pork and all that stuff. Maybe not pork, I guess. They're all good. They are Jews, that's all, yeah. But then I'm gonna go and send portions to people who can't be here. I'm gonna make sure even the poorest people can come and be part of the celebration here. So celebration and making sure all those who could not be around for the feast basically allowed them to be a part of it, right? It's great. It's a great thing to do, sending portions. That's why we try to do it for the homeless outreach and the widows in our church and stuff like that, because it shares expressions of mutual joy. There's celebration to be had by everyone. We are all allowed to be happy in this situation. There should be joy. It showed respect by sending gifts to the poor, who could not have made it, basically, to the celebrations. But also, it's said in Nehemiah 8:10, so I've got the verse here, just a reference, but it says, "Then he said unto them, Go your way, eat the fat, drink the sweet, and send portions unto them for whom nothing is prepared." You get that?
Yeah.
"For this day is holy unto our Lord. Neither be ye sorry, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." What were they doing? They were celebrating with joy. They were sending portions to people who didn't have the means to be able to be a part of this. So we read in Esther that during the time of Haman's decree, the Jews prayed and fasted. They wanted intervention from God, not from man. Right? They wanted intervention from God. Again, he's not mentioned in this whole book. Crazy, but there's a whole deliberation here. And the Jews believed that God would take care of them. We can read about Mordecai's faith, of how God will come through for the Jews. Esther 4:14, it said, "If thou altogether holdest thy peace at the time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place." Mordecai was confident that God was going to deliver them, deliver the Jews, deliver him, whether Esther spoke up or not, whether someone stepped in to act or not. He had faith that God would come through. And that's an amazing thing to have. Faith like that, even staring death in the face, being able to turn around and say, I am completely confident that God is going to look after me. Whether it's through you or a different means, this is how it's going to happen. God's going to come through. The Jews had faith that God would see them through. So they celebrated because God had seen them through. Right? He came through. He said they can celebrate. They're alive because he did what he said he would do. Right? God had brought them back to life when death seemed really, really certain. Okay? Section 4. The institution of the Feast of Purim, verses 20 to 26. Let's go with Ufaz. You want to read for us?
I have a question.
You have a question? Go for it.
Yeah, so when they were feasting, were there like people trying to attack their feast?
So what does it say before? That some people were helping them? I can imagine this, that whilst the celebration, the Jews are celebrating and like being able to have this gladness and this joy, that they were still being some form of protection, because fighting doesn't just stop like that, right? We all know this. There's a little bit of an aftermath, there's something that continues. It's a really good question. And it doesn't mean that all the Jews stopped all at once, but you'd like to think, like a well-oiled machine, you hit 300 deaths, you stop. No. It's hard to kind of see that. So yeah, there was probably still fighting. There's probably still some aggression going on, but the majority of Jews were coming together to celebrate. So yeah, it doesn't say there's any extra fighting, but I can, unless enemies are completely wiped out or running away, it's not going to work out any differently, right? There's going to be fighting going on afterwards. Does that answer your question or not? How do you feel? Okay, verses 20 to 26. Go for it, Yves.
And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far, who were in all the provinces of the king Xerxes.
Yeah.
To establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th day of the months of Adar, as the days which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, for sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman the son of Hammedatha and the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them, and had cast her to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that this wicked plot which Haman had devised and his sons should be hanged on the gallows, so they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate that. So this scripture, it's kind of confusing, but it basically tells us, it describes how Mordecai established this feast of Purim, and even why that name kind of came through. So you have the Feast of Pur, and that was the casting of lots, the dice being rolled, how they got to the date of the month of when this is all going to go down. And then he basically takes that name and makes it a feast. I want to take the thing that you use to decipher when we're going to be destroyed, and I'm going to make a celebration out of it, which is pretty incredible if you think about it. And basically, the scripture tells us the expectations on the Jews for this holiday, like why they're going to be celebrating. So Mordecai wrote these things. What things? Well, the goings on of the past 2 days, basically the context of why there is even a holiday, a feast of Purim. Why is it even a thing? So he's written all these details down. That's what he's saying. This letter has been sent out to say, just in case you Jews didn't know what was going on, this is what we're going to do from now on. Because there was this guy called Haman, and he goes and tells the story, and he gives complete context. But there's this amazing moment where you go, wow, there's a lot that's happened in these last 9 chapters. There's a lot to be celebrated. And these letters were sent out to all the Jews in the empire. And this would have taken a long time to get out for sure. We know that because they had to do it by horseback, and they had that whole relay mode where one horse would get tired and then there would be a second horse that would take it and run for a certain distance, and that's kind of how they did it. But this kingdom was huge. It was huge. So they had to get the message out. So verse 21, to establish this holiday, this feast among them, to keep the 14th and 15th day of Adar, which is roughly the month of March. Okay? That's roughly the month of March, February, March, on our calendars. But this holiday is still celebrated today. That's the amazing thing. It's still a thing. Purim is still a thing that is celebrated today. If you look at a Jewish calendar, it comes up in the first or second week of March. Obviously, it changes every so often. Leap years and things like that change it. But Purim happens. People come together. It is like a party about this time when God came through and saved them from destruction. And what a reason to celebrate. So a holiday to remember turning their sorrow into joy, their mourning to a good day, from death to deliverance, from the sentence of death to freedom from their enemies. And I kind of like this, and I smile when I write it, but the curse of Haman to the blessing of Mordecai. Like, that's a huge difference. A curse to a blessing. How one person wants you dead, but the other wants you alive. And they should make these days of feasting, of joy, of celebration, and sending presents and portions to one another, sending food, drink, money, clothes, looking after those around them, coming together, having a good time, but making sure everyone's good. We can read in Deuteronomy 15:7 that this is actually part of the Jewish law, to be generous to the poor, to look after those in need. So them sending portions was something that they just did, right? But they made it a part of the celebration as well. I love that. Even at a party, even when you could just be, great, this is amazing, best day ever, we still need to look after these people. That's a really amazing thing to have. So verse 24, why do we need a feast? Well, we are going to remember. Remember what? Because the enemy tried to destroy us. Again, there's repetition. But why? Because people need to know. Right? The more you hear something, the more you hear someone repeat something, the more you're going to remember. Why are we having a celebration? Because of Haman. Why again? Sorry? Because of Haman. Why? Because of Haman. Now I get it. Because he tried to kill us all. Because he tried to kill us all. And then it's this kind of repetition here. And Mordecai repeats it again. In verse 18 it says, on the 15th day of the same they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. That phrase, a day of feasting and gladness, is mentioned quite a few times in this chapter. Why? Because it's really important that you remember you feast and you're glad with it as well. It's a joyous time. It's a celebration. It's a big deal. So, Esther came before the king to request of him her life and the life of her people, a new decree for life, not death, a decree which allowed the Jews to stand up for themselves. This is what Mordecai is saying. Remember these things. Remember. A decree that swung this punishment of the gallows from Mordecai to Haman instead. Right? Verse 26, so we shall call these days Purim, after the name of Pur, the lot, because of the lots cast by Haman in Esther 3, verse 7. So Mordecai wrote this letter to the Jews and all of those things contained in it, and all that they had seen where their enemies rose up to kill them, but were in fact destroyed. And finally what came to them by report was the fall of Haman and the advancement of Mordecai and the favor shown to Esther and her people. This is why the engagement and observation of the days of Purim is so important, because there's a lot to remember. There's so much to remember. So we're on to our final section here. The reasons why the Jews have the feast. And we have section 5, verses 27 to 32, the remembering of these days. Okay, do you want to read it for us, Faraz? 27 to 32.
The Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves upon them, so as it should not fail, that they would keep those 2 days according to their writing and according to their appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, and every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perished from their seed. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail and Mordecai, the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letter unto all members of the 127 provinces of the kingdom of
Xerxes.
Oh, Xerxes.
Yeah, you can just say Xerxes.
There's the A though.
I know, it's Ahasuerus, but we can say Xerxes instead.
Xerxes, with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim to their times appointed according. So Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoyed them, and as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fasting of their cry, and the decree of Esther confirmed that these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is the final section of chapter 9. It closes out with Mordecai and Esther both confirming the holiday of Purim with a second letter. Why do you need a second letter? Because maybe the first wasn't good enough. I don't know. But there's a lot of things, again, to remember, right? Mordecai, who was second under the king, wrote the first letter to bring about the holiday. Now it seems that Esther is using her position to confirm the holiday. So it's not even just Mordecai. And it's kind of sad, because it says Mordecai the Jew. And you're like, Mordecai the Jew is second under the king. But he's called Mordecai the Jew because he is Mordecai the Jew. right? Esther, though, it's written by Esther the queen. There's a bit of power behind that punch, right? It's not just Mordecai the Jew. It's written by Esther the queen also. So this is really important to think about. It's a holiday sanctioned by the queen. It's coming from the queen's hand, her stamp of approval, right? The queen's weight and influence and authority come in with that second letter. Quite like the signet ring of the king, giving the seal of approval, the authority, the signature, to say it's got his backing. This letter from the queen had some real weight to it. So there's something to be said about why they do this, right? It's not just recognizing that Mordecai the Jew is trying to get this done. It's now saying the queen backs this as well. And I love that. It's not just saying there's one person backing it, there's two people backing it, but just so happens to be coming from the palace, the queen, from her hand saying, yes, we're going to do this. So that is the Feast of Purim. You can look that up. Look in the Jewish calendar. Find out the dates for it. Google it. They have a wild time. I watched a couple of videos, saw some pictures of celebrations. This is the thing that is still celebrated. Why? Because it's really important to remember. It's really important to remember what God has done. And that is the chapter 9 of Esther. I've got some extra points, but Wes, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, not really. Yeah.
Good to go. Anyone else got anything else want to add? Any other questions? No. Okay, I've got 3 final points for you here. First one, remember the days of trials. Okay, God uses such times as these trials to teach us, to form us, and to shape us, right? How we are going to react, how we're going to stand up, how are we going to respond to these times if we never really remember what we've been through. It's not, sadly enough, it's not all peachy, right? It's not all roses. Not every day of your life is not perfect. But you know what? When God saves and puts us through these trials, but saves us through these trials, we need to remember the trials as well as the salvation as well. It's a big deal. It's a big thing to remember. So these times can be tough. It can be painful, but with God, it is worth it. You need to remember what God's done for us and where He's brought us out from. Okay? Point number 2. There is a time for sadness and a time for joy. Okay? Accept both. Mordecai was extremely sad. He was mourning, sackcloth and ashes all over him, not able to come into the king's presence because of how he looked. And that was a good thing for him to do, because he wasn't pretending everything was good, because it wasn't. So he accepted that position and he responded in the right way. And then there was a time for joy, for celebration, for feasting. Afterwards, after all the trials had been overcome, we were there. So when you guys are going through your lives and you're going up and down with the emotions and you're having sadness and you're thinking, woe is me, I'm so bad, I'm so sad, I'm going to throw some ashes in the air and sit in an old fire pit, maybe not, I don't know. Where can I get some sackcloth from? Maybe that's not what you think. But when you're down in the dumps, you need to remember what that feels like. Because when you come out of it, you know where God's brought you out from. Okay? That first point ties to the second point, because actually, in trials, we're generally quite sad. Why is this happening to me? Life is so tough. What have I done? Why is everything in the world so bad happening to me? It's not. But it seems like that sometimes, right? And when we get to those highs, we think, man, I was so good to get me out of that. No, remember what God's done. But accept that it's okay as a Christian to have times of sadness, as well as times of happiness as well. Right? Times of joy as well as mourning. That's the way of life. That's how God's intended us to be. So, third point, you have the backing of the king. Not King Xerxes. I don't care about his backing. Right? Not even Queen Esther. Her backing means nothing to me. But the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, if you know him, if you know Jesus Christ, you have the backing of the King. He's not in your corner, you're on his team. But knowing that you're part of his family, knowing that he loves you, that he has forgiven you, that he backs you, that he has sent his Spirit to be with you, there's a lot of things going on here that should fill you with confidence. Do you live like you're accepted by the King? Do you live like you're accepted? Because Jesus has accepted you. He wants us to change. He wants us to ask for forgiveness. He wants us to move away from sin in our lives. But he's come and found us and has died on the cross for our sins there. He's accepted that fate. He's accepted that weight, that harshness. He's accepted it. And he's accepted us as well. Jesus is King. That's the King that has accepted us. Jesus Christ, King of Kings. Are you living like you're accepted by Jesus Christ?